Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Column Live. It's the 7th of February 2013 and it's just gone 1:30. Myself, Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson are here, and we'll be joined a little bit later by Kevin Bull. How you doing, Brian?
Doing fine, I think.
Good. What's the weather?
The weather's very unpredictable at the moment, so it's colder than it seems, if I can explain that. It's about 3 degrees out there, but it does seem colder than it really is, whatever it is. Overcast, generally dull, the wind's pretty bitter, and I don't know whether we're going to be in for some snow or not. But
apparently it's going to get worse next week.
Yeah, well, it is England, and of course the government at the moment is apparently playing with the weather in order to keep undesirable people out the country. And that's their cunning plan.
Who's starting today?
Well, I think I am, I suppose.
Okay then, off you go.
Basically, a group has started up a website where they're actually saying, and I think this is probably one of the most sensible initiatives in the country at the moment, that it's become quite clear that the BBC has overstepped its power, that it's not being honest and reliable in its reporting. And so here is a website with a group of people who are saying we need to do something about this. It's not enough to let the BBC get away with being a government propaganda machine. They're not telling us the truth. They're not telling us what we need to know. They're not impartial. We're paying for it, and it's making a mockery of us. So there's the address, bbccharter.co.uk. Just pop that straight into the search bar. And you should end up at that website, and we'd encourage you to go and have a look.
Exactly. Oh, I know it's the thing for Dr. David Halpin down there on the right. So
yeah, well, I think quite a few people are going to get involved with that initiative because the BBC is up to something very dirty.
Yep.
And mentioning the BBC
and dirtiness,
we have to talk about this one,
yeah,
which you picked up.
Well, Mike was telling me earlier that this is an old news, but it only appeared on the BBC website today. Apparently Boris Johnson pre-recorded a phone call for Nick Clegg's radio show on LBC. Apparently he called in and said, "Hi Nick, it's Boris here from Islington. When are you going to get all those government ministers out of their posh limos and onto public transport like everybody else? And how can we possibly expect government to vote for increase in infrastructure spending, which we need in this city, and upgrading the tube, which we all need, when they sit in their chauffeur-driven limos paid for by the taxpayer?" And then he signed off apparently as Nick, "Get them out of their limos, Boris, over and out." And apparently when Clegg realised the question had been recorded before the show, he apparently had a joke and said, "Well, that's easy for him to say, isn't it?" But it's just all, I don't know, puppet show really, isn't it?
Well, it seems unbelievably puerile, as if we're to believe that there's any form of disagreement over policy between Boris Johnson and Nick Clegg. And as we showed in an earlier news this week, that of course Cameron and Clegg, they have a go at trying to fool the public into the fact they disagree on things, when Clegg was overheard saying we'll have to be careful, otherwise we'll run out of things to disagree on. This is puppet show. Mike?
Well, it sort of staggers me in some ways that a serving Deputy Prime Minister actually has a radio show. Is this not blatant propaganda? Is this not party political? You know, there are limits to what party messages can be given on the media, and for somebody to be given a talk show like this seems like a fairly serious subversion of the democratic process.
On the basis during an election, all parties should be given free,
at any time,
equivalent access to the media.
Yeah, but at any time, you know, he's clearly not going to be giving an unbiased, balanced view of the world when it's his talking shop we're talking about here. Yeah,
well, very good point. Perhaps we could encourage people to comment on that and start tweaking and twittering and blogging and emailing.
Maybe contact LBC and just ask how they stand on it.
Of course, the thing to remember is the government we're going to be talking about, and we have talked about this week, the government is heavily monitoring the social networking system because they're desperately worried to know what ordinary people are talking about. So let's tell them. So if you're unhappy with Mr. Clegg and the BBC, and sorry, who was the radio show on?
It was on LBC, but apparently Boris is going on there next week.
Right, okay. So if you don't like what's happening, get tweeting about it, because you're being monitored.
Yeah.
Warmer climes, Gibraltar.
In Gibraltar, yeah. I'd love your comments on this. Apparently the Royal Navy confronts a Spanish warship that's strayed into British waters over there. The warship Tornado entered the British waters near Gibraltar 20 minutes where it was confronted by the Navy and asked it to leave. Apparently tensions on the rock on Gibraltar have been aroused by the European Court of Justice, which last year upheld a Brussels decision to designate an area of British waters a Spanish conservation site. Apparently also last week saw violent protests calling for the Prime Minister Rajoy's resignation following allegations that he and other members of the party took payments from in secret from a Swiss-based slush fund of 25 million. So we don't know if this is all, well, according to the Mail, they don't know if this is all this het up because of what was going on with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, well, I think that we've seen this, of course, many times over a lot of years, that the Spanish, if they have an opportunity, make an incident to help refresh their claim to Gibraltar. So I think there's a lot of posturing here. Of course, it's becoming increasingly difficult for Britain to react since our navy is being cut and cut and cut, so we should remember that. But of course, it's interesting that this action's come about at the same time that we've got Argentina also starting to make fresh claims against the Falkland Islands. So I think there's likely to be some sort of joint process here. But of course, one thing's for sure, what these countries both sense is that Cameron, as an absolute traitor to Britain, is cutting British armed forces to the bone so that we cannot react overseas. We're being dragged into this bilateral agreement with the French. And so I think these people are beginning to sense that British overseas power is being weakened. Yeah. And of course, Cameron is delighted to do this because he's not acting in Britain's best interest. So my prediction is you're going to see a lot more of this stuff starting to happen with Gibraltar, Falkland Islands and other overseas countries, basically. I think this is new for us. We got an article from the Morning Star.
Yes, I was really surprised to see it up there. Apparently, there's a new Public Bill Committee has passed a government amendment stripping the judge of ability to balance justice and security. Apparently, the overall intent of the amendment is to make the CMP, which is the closed material procedures, not the last resort, but almost inevitable recourse of the courts where they put an issue. The side opposing the government would be excluded from the courtroom and would be unable to hear the evidence used against them. Apparently, the government is also saw off attempts to prevent secret courts being used in cases where somebody's liberty is at stake. So it's just more info and more clamping down with these secret courts, even though so many are opposed to it.
Right, and one of the reasons that we thought it would be interesting to put this Morning Star article up is we could say that, of course, the Morning Star is to the left wing of politics, for those who believe in left and right, which we don't, but we'll play the game and say here is essentially a left-wing organisation which is itself beginning to flag up that something nasty is growing in this country. Yeah. And of course, if we lose a free press under Leveson, and there was manipulation in the Lords going through about Leveson yesterday, or reported in the press yesterday. Here's the Morning Star now actually beginning to realise that there's something approaching a dictatorship beginning to creep in. And so what's the story here? Basically, if you want to find out what the truth is, you need to be reading a lot of material, thinking hard about what you're reading and who's telling the truth. But you certainly can't dismiss an organisation because it's carrying some bad news on one subject. Look to see where the truth is bubbling up to the surface. So we think this was kind of an important article from the start.
Interesting how that they've called this closed material procedures, CMPs.
Well,
so another little.
We'll probably be talking about language in official documents a bit later in the programme. But what you see more and more is that there is a particular language being used which does not make sense to the ordinary person in the street. But of course it does make sense to the officials that are handling it. Some people call this Aesopian, so it's a hidden language. It's deliberately complicated, so we can't understand what they are talking about. and that's the means by which they're going to slide things through.
Yeah.
It's a kangaroo court.
Absolutely.
Star chamber
Yep.
is what we're talking about. And children.
Yeah, you got to pay to play in a new park, apparently. I believe it's Wandsworth. They've had all new equipment put up for children in Battersea Park. But if your kids want to go and play in there, you're going to have to pay. So much for being free, having a good old time and a bit of a laugh down at the park with your children. You got to put your hand in your pocket.
Well, there's some interesting things in the article. It says that Wandsworth Council bulldozed the site last month after evicting the final Occupy protesters who were part of a last gasp effort to save it. So we're going to say well done to those Occupy protesters for your efforts there. The council is investing $200,000 in new adventure play equipment that does not require monitoring by staff, 14 of whom have lost their job. So out go the public sector jobs, and what's coming in? Private firms, charities, voluntary groups and not-for-profit organisations will be invited to tender to manage additional services on the site. And so here we see loyal public sector people being sacked, and what do? Is behind their backs you then bring in the private firms, and of course most of the charities and indeed the not-for-profit organisations are not quite what they seem, because invariably you can find a profit-making part to them, as part of the
and then you've got
set.
these private organisations, so they're going to be hanging around parks, they're going to be keeping an eye on children and things like that.
Well, then we'll bring in the private security
Yeah.
firms, and of course they'll be recruiting from people overseas that can't be checked. We don't know who the background is. So what we're watching step by step is privatisation of everything in the country. The National Health Service, obviously all of the road infrastructures coming up. This isn't accidental. This is a cross-party agenda to place control of Britain in the hands of unaccountable corporate organisations. Children are not safe, neither are we, as we'll see a bit later.
Just, this story, just quickly, just 'cause we've got so much to get through. Apparently there's been a job centre has put up a vacancy, I believe, for building, in the building trade, and it's only written in Polish. So not up for grabs for anybody English. And there's a fury going on about
positive discrimination.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be covering this in the programme today, but one of the things that we are going to talk about in detail is this gentleman Saul Alinsky, the American radical activist who talks about essentially implementing a Marxist-type society by rubbing communities raw. So getting people at each other's throats, getting them anxious about what the government is doing. Yeah. And of course this is a total insult in the face of anybody who lives in Britain and speaks English as their normal language. You're being excluded whilst there's positive discrimination in this case for Polish. It's not a question of the Polish, it's the mentality that put this in place. And things are not good in Europe as a whole, as we keep pointing out. So Cameron Clegg, and who's the other person? Ed Miliband, nearly forgot him, are constantly trying to push us into the European Union. Meanwhile, what are we watching unfold in Europe?
This was heartbreaking because this is so easily could happen to us. Somebody was trampled to death in Greece, scrapping for food. I mean, this shouldn't be happening, not in Europe, not in 2013. But a gentleman was crushed to death when the farmers outside the Agricultural Ministry came up and started distributing free fruit and veg. There was a stampede. Some 55 tonnes of produce was given away by the farmers who were actually protesting high production costs. It sparked a total stampede. And it was like every man for himself, apparently. All of the 55 tonnes of food was gone in under 2 hours. And unfortunately, as this rush for the food was going on, a gentleman died. So, I mean, my advice is start stocking up. Just 3 months' supply is what Ian Crane actually says. He says always make sure you're okay for 3 months. If you need to bunker
agree with that, but stocking up and speaking out. And of course, isn't it time that communities started to support their local farmers, because of course what the big corporations, Tessa Cohen's and all of the other big supermarkets have taken control away from, of local food supplies have been taken away by these huge conglomerates. So one of the things that you might like to think about is getting in touch directly with local farmers and seeing if some form of cooperative organisation could be set up in order to take local food at reasonable prices.
I think the message here more so is that, you know, this is Greece, this could happen any day here.
Yeah, and people from Poland have been talking to us about what happened in the economic breakdown there, where food supplies disappeared out of shops overnight. And we've seen here with petrol shortages that food can easily disappear out of supermarkets within a matter of days. So as Louise is saying, if you think there's problems ahead, it would be wise to stock up if and where you can and help
definitely.
a friend. America.
The Federal Reserve Bank has apparently been hacked by Anonymous, who have claimed to have stolen the details of more than 4,000 bank executives. Anonymous apparently struck the bank on Sunday. The technology news site ZDNet separately reported that Anonymous appeared to have published information said to be containing the login information credentials of more than 4,000 US bankers. Apparently they've done it in to protest the death and the support of the computer prodigy Aaron Swartz, who killed himself allegedly on the 11th of January.
Yeah. I'm very curious about this subject, because I wonder whether this is real. If it's real and the people have done it, we can understand why they're angry with the banking system. But I also wonder whether there's an added spin on this. Of course, it gives the Americans another opportunity to start this preemptive strike on anybody who's operating on the internet or a website, or they're talking about what's going on. As we revealed, I think it was yesterday, that basically the Americans now feel that they can simply take you out in an electronic way, whether or not you've actually done anything. So I think some of these stories we have to think about very carefully. We've also picked The Guardian, a newspaper which is not known for its what is the word? I'm lost for words there. Not known for its support for the ordinary individual. Propaganda machine, some might say. So if we're going to look after our health, we should know about this.
Yeah, more stuff on GMOs. Apparently there's been a new gene which is called gene 6. And this gene, it apparently induces physical mutations. It was also linked to the development of tumours in rats. And a safety grower has blown the lid totally on this secret virus that has been found in tomatoes and other genetically modified crops.
Yeah. So how do we stop
organic
this?
Or grow your own?
Yeah.
Well, grow your own, preferably.
And people have got to make it quite clear they're not going to accept this type
GMOs.
of mutilated food.
And they should be labelled as well.
Mike?
You stop it by doing exactly what you suggested. You set up little groups to group buying directly from farmers.
Yep.
Even offer them a forward contract for delivery in the future if you want, but get communities working together and get group buying working with local suppliers, local providers that can guarantee the quality of the food then.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent. And we've got a
chicken pox.
bit more, chicken pox.
Chicken pox. Well, we said about how many people were getting chicken pox even though they had the vaccine. Well, apparently it's now triggered a shingles epidemic. And for the past several years over in the States, they've been promoting this vaccine. But now a new study published by a German medical journal, or the Dermatologist, which is the English version, has revealed the childhood vaccine for chicken pox is more than likely directly responsible for triggering this epidemic. So epidemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just more and more stuff, negative stuff coming about the vaccines.
Okay.
So not good. And
pollution is also becoming interesting again here.
Yep.
If we believe this story.
Yeah. I mean, they're saying it's on asthma, it affects asthma and everything else, but they're now saying it's the cause of preeclampsia in expectant mothers. And women with asthma are particularly vulnerable to the condition, and with high blood pressure and fluid retention, according to the new safety study. the pollution is up apparently by 2,000 cases, of 2,000 cases of preeclampsia since it's noted with regards to pollution. So they're blaming that. I mean, could it be something to do maybe with the little lines we're seeing in the sky? But that's another day, I think.
Well, it could be. And the other thing is that there have been constant rumours and also some April the 1st stories talking about the government taxing the quality of the air.
Yeah.
Now, is this what they're driving at? That there's going to be some additional tax on you live in a polluted city, it's going to cost to clean the air, so we need to tax you again on this. Mike, you're looking pensive. Okay, well, think through that, have a read of the story, and if you know what's happening, what the real drive behind it is, please let us know. Brings us on to economic matters and printing money out of nothing.
Well, indeed. This is a picture of Mark Carney here, who is currently Governor of the Bank of Canada, but as we know, he will become the Governor of the Bank of England in July. And today he was in front of the Treasury Select Committee. I mean, this man is widely regarded, according to the Telegraph at least, as peerless among central bankers. So, you know, I would imagine the Treasury Select Committee was quite keen to have a chat to him about various things. In December, he said that he would look at the possibility of abandoning or at least trying to encourage the government to abandon the 2% inflation target, which has been really the only government control of the Bank of England since 1998. And what was really interesting about his comments in front of the Treasury Select Committee this morning was that he really is pushing the idea that the bank needs to remain totally independent from government. In other words, government has no control over the policies that the bank implements, and therefore, other than this 2% target, and the only implication for Mark Carney with his big fat salary, the only implication for him if they don't meet the 2% target is a nasty letter from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, really saying, you haven't met your target, why not? So Carney was suggesting, inflation's been above 2% for quite some time now, but they haven't done anything about that with regard to interest rates, and he was basically saying that was a good faith decision by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, and that they really just made a mistake about how long it would take for headline rates of inflation to come back down. Now, we've discussed inflation quite a lot in the past, in recent weeks. Clearly, the headline rate of inflation bears no reality as regards people's daily lives, and increasingly will become even less related to reality of people's lives as particularly the food price inflation starts to hit in the coming months. But he is absolutely pushing the notion that independence should be enshrined, that there should be a structure put in place, an absolutely clear structure, he said, where we get a remit to execute their policies as best as they see fit. So we get no say in what the Bank of England does.
Yeah, and it's we also like to point out that at the moment we've got positive money, which is suggesting that the sort of Bank of England is clean and beyond reproach and should be a central part of correcting the money system, whereas our view is very much that if we're going to deal with the criminal activity around the banks and the fraudulent printing of money for debt in a debt-based system, then the Bank of England has certainly got to be cleaned up as well. The Bradbury pound, the greenback pound idea is key to this. And I'll just bring up a little interesting topic here, which I think is relevant, is we've discovered that although lobbying is supposedly tightly controlled for MPs and those around Westminster, that within Parliament is a gentleman called the Remembrancer, and he is there in order to monitor what is taking place in Westminster and the debates, in order to be assured that the best interests of the City of London are met. So it would appear that this gentleman, and if anybody likes to do some research, you'll find it fascinating, that the city has its own man to monitor what goes on inside Parliament. So is Parliament controlling the city, or could it be that the city is actually controlling Parliament? We'll leave you to think about that. What's Michael Gove been up to, Mike?
Well, I don't think he really knows what to be up to. That's the key. That's the key point here. The government's been forced into yet another U-turn, this time on exams. And of course, it shouldn't really come as any surprise that the government has had to do yet another U-turn. But basically, if you remember a few months ago, Gove came out and said that perhaps GCSEs weren't that great after all, and that perhaps we should have a baccalaureate certificate instead. And the howls of anguish from the Liberal Democrats and from the regulator of exams of the exam boards in Britain really has there clearly been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, but the howls of anguish have resulted in him backing down, and he's not going to do it. So I don't think he really knows which way to go.
Well, I'm just going to challenge a little bit there, because I think this man knows exactly what he's doing, and what he's doing is creating turbulence. So we have poor school teachers and head teachers at the moment that don't know whether they're coming or going, because the moment the school's routines and curricula settle down, then actually what's going to happen is they're going to be changed again. So we're seeing this constant turning, U-turns, constant change. And in fact, the reality of the situation is that the government is implementing a change agenda. The ultimate agenda is simply more change and faster change, because this is actually breaking down the normal functioning of the education system in this case. And what we're actually bringing in is destabilisation of the wider country infrastructure. If you want to research more on this, research Saul Alinsky, because both Labour and the Conservatives have declared in their own documentation that not only are they using Saul Alinsky policy, they will actually already have in place the community activists who are helping to introduce this turbulence. So it's change for change's sake. It's happening in the police, it's happening in the NHS, and the ultimate agenda is to achieve breakdown. The Independent, the famous bedroom tax.
Yeah, I mean, this is an extremely good article, and I recommend everybody has a read at it. Just to read a few of the first lines. It says, perverse, cruel, self-defeating, unjust. These terms could be legitimately used to describe a whole raft of government policies. But consider this leading contender on all four counts, and he's talking about the bedroom tax. The so-called bedroom tax, due to be imposed from April, all social housing tenants of working age will have their housing benefit docked if they're judged to have a spare bedroom, for 670,000 households already struggling to pay the bills and rent while feeding themselves or their children. That means losing an average of £14 a week and up to £80 a month. Misery awaits. And so he goes on. But the thing that staggered me, or doesn't surprise me at all, but the thing that I think that most mainstream commentators aren't pointing out is that there is pressure on people to move, and this programme looks to me, as part of the localism sort of agenda, looks to me like it is an ethnic cleansing programme, in the sense that they're saying, well, some people will move house immediately, and that will leave a house that other people can move into, and they're basically going to be jiggling people around in order to try and get families and people moved into the right size of house. And they say that this is so that they can better manage their housing stock. I think, in fact, it's so that they consider that it is so that they can manage the stock of people, because we are being farmed.
Well, I've got to agree with your comments completely, and perhaps it's an advantage speaking from Plymouth, England, because I can tell you that literally 2-3 miles down the road, a whole group of local people, many who could trace their ancestry back in that area for generations, were simply upped and moved out of Devonport, supposedly for regeneration of that area to take place. But of course what they What the council then did is replace the housing with housing which was not affordable to the people that they'd bussed out. A large number of executive homes, waterside developments, and then part mortgage, part rent properties, which ultimately resulted in a major change to the whole structure of that area of the city. So I can certainly give that as a comment. And the other thing is that we've been contacted over the last couple of days by people who are now suffering under this agenda to the extent that they're having allowances cut because they have a spare bedroom, to the extent that they can't afford to feed themselves. And what has emerged is that in carrying out the policy that you've described, local councils are in fact breaching human rights. And we now know that a number of individuals are looking at the potential to bring private prosecutions, not against the councils, but against the individual officers in the council who are implementing this procedure without considering the ultimate effect. Can people feed themselves? Have they got a warm, dry place to live?
Well, I also read an article earlier saying it's actually going to end up really costing the councils more because so many people end up going into forced private rented accommodations because of this, which is going to up. They're far more expensive than the council properties, so it's going to end up costing more for the councils.
Well, that's a possibility, but,
Yeah.
but actually we are seeing councils simply shutting the door to people who need accommodation. They're not interested if there's people on the streets. They simply move them out the area. Mike?
Yeah, it probably is going to cost them more, but we've got to remember that this whole policy is nothing to do with reducing cost. That's the point I'm trying to make. I think this is not about reducing cost. There's another agenda here, and
Of social engineering.
Of social engineering, and the fact that it's going to cost more, they don't care about that.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's gloomy. We need to deal with these problems. We are seeing the slide of UK into some sort of communitarian dictatorship. It's becoming quite clear. And perhaps we can turn to no better place to have a look than the NHS. And you found a very interesting story
this
here.
Morning about he's in charge of the NHS. His name's David Nicholson, and apparently he idolised the Soviet leader Brezhnev when he was a trainee. He was a trainee through the height of the Cold War. He idolised Brezhnev. At the same time he started work in mental health unit at Bristol. He joined the Communist Party back in 1977. As of today, he is earning £270,000 a year as chief exec of the NHS. He's nicknamed the Big Beast because of his abrasive management style. He's responsible, this is the interesting bit, he was the person responsible for supervising Staffordshire Hospital between 2005-2006. And apparently it's been a remarkable journey for a man who was a communist for 6 years until his membership lapsed in '83. One of the things that he's renowned for is that he refused to cancel a major NHS IT project which became monumental to Whitehall when it was clear that costs were out of control. Eventually it was cancelled and it only cost us 12.7 billion, us taxpayers. He was appointed the chief of the NHS under Blair, and now Cameron's obviously the third Prime Minister he's serving under. Despite such scandalous waste of money, Nicholson escaped any blame and still enjoys the confidence of Cameron. He also likes to take first-class train trips. The last bill was £6,000 in a year. Every time he claimed to have been attending official meetings, but it's been investigated apparently, and they were actually held via video conferencing, meaning he could have taken part with it anywhere in the country. So we don't know where he was off to on his first-class train travel. But he's still in his job.
Well, excuse me, I almost don't know where to start on this gentleman. He's very Eric Pickles, isn't he? But of course the key thing is that the big lies, he left the Communist Party. People like this don't leave the party, they simply fail to declare they're part of it anymore. The ideology is embedded. And isn't it incredible that we should have somebody at the head of the NHS who has supported a regime which has killed how many? 60 million people, prison camps, torture, detention, lack of civil liberties, and a man who idolises Brezhnev is put in charge of one of the most delicate and supposedly caring organisations that we have. Is it a coincidence that we're now starting to see the NHS descend into some sorts of eugenics programme, genocide some people are talking about? 600 to 1,200 people are said to have died at Staff's Hospital, and at the moment that report is only just emerging. We've got a communist running the NHS. Of course, the Miliband brothers come from a communist background. If you do your research, you'll find that Gordon Brown was helped into power by the communists in Scotland. And if we broaden out the ideology a bit, we're not talking pure communism here because we've got the corporate aspect. We're talking the communitarian system, the political ideology. So if you want to know why we're seeing this massive change in Britain, it's because we have a cross-party cabal that is communitarian, and their agenda is complete chaos in this country until we're normalised, and that effectively means we agree with their agenda.
Yeah.
What are these people doing in the NHS? I think Mike's about to give us an amazing insight.
So this was in the Plymouth Herald, an article entitled "End of Life Row Causes Public Fear," and NHS chiefs, according to the Herald, have said the controversy surrounding end-of-life care is making the public wrongly fearful. And as we reported a couple of weeks ago, I can't remember which member of the government it was, felt that perhaps the term Liverpool Care Pathway really needed to be rebranded, that people were clearly uncomfortable with Liverpool Care Pathway. So he's not talking about changing the pathway, but he's just talking about giving it a new name. So apparently, speaking at yesterday's Plymouth Hospital's NHS Trust Board meeting, Dr. Doug Hooper, a palliative care consultant at Derriford Hospital, said the scaremongering headlines relating to the Liverpool Care Pathway were creating a huge amount of fear. Now, this is a timely article because, of course, the government has announced that there will be a review into the use of Liverpool Care Pathway, and it is going to be chaired by Julia Neuberger.
Should we call her up?
Let's call her up. So there she is. Now, I was quite interested in why they might choose this lady, and it turns out that for a long time now she has been absolutely fascinated with death. For example, she has 3 books. This was the first one that I could find, 1987, Caring for Dying People of Different Faiths. And then in 1991, A Necessary End, Attitudes to Death. And then in 2004, Dying Well, A Guide to Enabling a Good Death.
Oh my.
And then that followed at the same time. In parallel with that, she was publishing articles in various journals and whatnot. Death on Camera, that she was talking about, that was Lord Winston's series where he actually showed somebody dying on camera. She was commenting on that. And then in the Washington Post, she was justifying Obama's Obamacare and denying that was tantamount to death panels for senior citizens. And also on the BBC. So she was commenting on assisted dying here in this Radio 3 series. So she has a long history of discussing assisted dying and
promoting it.
Yeah. Well, yes, absolutely promoting it. Now, the next point is, if we look at the next one, in 2005 we had the Mental Capacity Act, and during the period passing through the Lords, Earl Howe attempted to push an amendment into this bill just before it was made an act, and he basically was uncomfortable with a particular section, and he said, I make no apology for returning to an issue that I've raised both in committee and on report, the question of whether a person acting under a lasting power of attorney should have the power excuse me, should have the power to consent. Excuse
me. Are you alive?
Yeah.
Okay, just,
I think somebody's trying to kill me here. Should have the power to consent or refuse life-sustaining treatment. Julia Neuberger voted against that amendment. So that was an anti-euthanasia amendment, which she has voted against.
Yeah.
So I think that she has demonstrated quite clearly what her position is, and I find it extremely interesting that she has been chosen to chair this panel.
Maybe she should volunteer to go on the pathway herself.
To test it.
Yeah.
Well, that's something.
Maybe.
I've actually, if I just hold it up in front of the camera, this is the article from the Plymouth Herald. There's some really good journalists in the Herald, but it seems that they're largely gagged at the moment when they get to these stories. But it's very interesting that the hospital spokesman here, of course, is blaming the problem on the general public. If you hold up your hand and say something isn't right, then it's switched back. And of course, within the NHS, there are thousands of good and dedicated people trying to do their job, but we are hearing more and more that they're saying they can't do their job properly, they can't be as organised as they should be, they can't be as efficient, they can't be as caring, because the same turbulence is going on inside the hospitals, which we're seeing in education. And I'm going to quote a figure of 7 million, it could have been 4, but we're talking millions of pounds. The Derriford Hospital management, Derriford Hospital in Plymouth, spent on a change agenda, and when I personally challenged the then chief executive as to what they changed from to, he couldn't actually tell me. So huge amounts of money being spent on change programs in the NHS, and the turbulence is now actually starting to destroy the efficiency. These people, in our opinion, know what they're doing. And we can also say that we have local people who've contacted us telling about, in one case, an elderly lady that went into Derriford Hospital with a mild stroke, and in A&E on her medical records was put "do not resuscitate." There was no consultation with the family, and mysteriously there was no doctor's signature. So whatever's going on inside the hospitals, it's being driven not by the clinical staff, it's being driven by the managers. And of course, when we start to look at who the managers are, we're starting to find communists. And if anybody would like a debate over the dangers of that, have a look at the figures of the millions of deaths under the communist regimes, whether it's China or the Soviet Union. And I'm just going to put the gentle barb in with the BBC that, of course, it was the BBC that promoted the utter lie that when the Berlin Wall came down, this malevolent ideology simply disappeared. No, it didn't. And that is what is now starting to surface. If we want to stop it, we've got to talk about it. Now, Mike, you've picked up on something else particularly interesting with Luton.
Oh, well, this is a fascinating story. We've had an email sent to us. I've taken out the name of the person that it originated from. They were not the person that sent it to us. I want to make that absolutely
clear. Sorry about that. The person we have received this from an anonymous source. At least I'm not going to say who it was. But basically, this email says, "Dear Manager, I've been asked by CLMT to identify members of staff who are reservists or members of the TA, magistrates or special constables. We advise any of your staff who are either a reservist or a member of the TA, magistrate or special, please advise me of any of your staff," and so on. And then it says this information will be held centrally so that the organisation can better understand the implications to its delivery of services. This looks to me like the council is preparing for, I don't know, trouble on the streets, perhaps?
Well, we've got a public picture of trouble on the streets, and of course we know that at the moment in Europe there's massive trouble on the streets and massive potential for trouble on the streets, and that trouble has clearly been engineered by the supranational state, the European Union, which has smashed to pieces economies, and Europeans are now reaping the price of that. But it looks as though somebody knows something is going to happen in this country as well. Did you get any response? I know you were trying to speak to.
I have asked for a response from their press team. I asked for that the day before yesterday. I still haven't got one, and I was trying to chase that up this morning. But I absolutely believe there is trouble coming in this country, I'm going to be putting some detail on that in the coming issue of the UK Column newspaper. I think that it is inevitable, but I also think that it's being driven as well. And that story of the Polish job advertisement is exactly case in point. They're doing everything that they can at the moment to incite any possible chaos on the streets at the moment.
Yeah, because of course then they can become heavy-handed. We're going to come back onto this, so I'm just going to show you a book here written by a gentleman called Christopher Story. It's about European politics. It's very, very detailed, and in particular it goes into the power play between, I'm going to say, the Marxist ideology, but working through the Soviet Union into East Germany and Germany. What he's warning of is that the European Union tries to tell us it's a benign organisation, but actually its whole political ideology is in something akin to Marxism. But what I wanted to highlight, we'll make this available. There's a table here in the front of the book which is talking about the intention of this wonderful organisation to destabilise the UK and other Western democracies. The first part of the plan over 25, 30 years is to demoralise the country. The second part is to destabilise it. And the third part here is crisis, violence on the streets. Now this came out of the Soviet Union with a defector in the early 1970s. And when you read this table of what's planned and what the results will be, and you look out the window in Britain today, there's an uncanny resemblance. Yes. So is it a coincidence that Jack Straw worked to get rid of all the records held by our security forces on people who had records of work with communist movements in Britain and overseas, or did he do that deliberately? Mike?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I believe, I might be wrong about this, but I believe that book is now out of print, but I have seen that it is available as a PDF on the internet, so search for it and the whole book is available to be read.
The author, Christopher Story, has unfortunately died, some would say under mysterious circumstances, but we know the gentleman, or we knew the gentleman very well, and I'm sure that he would be delighted if some of his material can be put to good use. So we'll see what we can do to help people look at that. But just emphasise that UK Column Live is telling the truth over this. This is part of an appendix to a Luton document, which is a statement of governance. It's the Governance Action Plan, 2009-10. And here we are with Article 4, Major Luton Emergency, including potential social unrest. Emergency plan in place, communications, emergency officers. So somebody somewhere knows that they should be planning for big trouble on the streets. And if we come back, we mentioned it briefly earlier in the show, we were talking about language. This is a very interesting document from Luton, Luton Together. Some people might be interested in the significance of butterflies. I believe that's something to do with transformation. And here, of course, is the Council Strategy for Transformation, 2011-2014. Now, the art of Hegelian dialect in Soviet documents was that they used a language which the ordinary person couldn't understand. So many people, perhaps on the streets, will ask what the transformation plan in Luton is. If we have a look inside, I'm not sure whether you can read this, but in blue, they're saying what their vision is, that the council will be high-performing, financially viable authority, delivering high-quality services that improve health and opportunity together with our partners. Basically, you read it, it's a wish list. And they're going to achieve the wish list by using lean change agents. Now, if anybody out there in the public sector can tell us exactly what a lean change agent is, we'd be very grateful, but we know that change agents are the very terms used by Saul Alinsky for the people who are going to completely overturn orderly Western society. And how are they going to do this, apart from agitation? Well, they're going to change our behaviours. And so here is Luton declaring absolutely that they are going to be working to change the behaviour of people. And of course, the UK column has already warned in great detail that the government has already got a multi-million-pound plan implemented through, amongst others, the Cabinet Office and the Leadership Office associated with our Cabinet Office to change people's behaviour through applied behavioural psychology, which the government calls nudging, but is in fact deliberate mind control. So this is pretty dangerous stuff.
Aline, they couldn't have been talking about Eric Pickles then?
They couldn't have been talking about Eric Pickles, and presumably the head of the NHS would not come under a lean change agent. I thought the NHS was cutting back on obesity, but they seem to have missed their head gentleman. So the UK column's advice to people is we need to fight this in the right way, peacefully, lawfully, expose what's going on, keep calm and carry on, but we need to pull these jokers out of the woodwork. And as we've said before, if you want to know who is actually attacking the country, it's very easy to see. We put some of them on the front page of the UK column, and we've said that basically these are Saul Alinsky change agents. They've just cut their hair and put on suits. That does not mean to say that we should trust these people. And note in the picture behind Mr. Plump Pickles that the slogan for the Conservatives is vote for change. And of course that change is not defined, because constant change is revolution. Kevin, I know you're waiting in the wings there. Are you with us?
Hi, Kevin.
I certainly am.
Okay.
Hi, Lou. Hi, Brian.
Right, thank you for coming in. I've got a small section to do on Oxford. This is in relation to child abuse and paedophilia around the Thames Valley Police Operation Bullfinch. But we want to also want to bring in some stuff we've discovered where the police either are being incompetent or they deliberately don't want to get involved with other people who are reporting abuse. So we'll run through that, which will probably say 5 minutes, and then we'll open up the discussion, and feel free to start where you like.
I certainly shall, Brian.
Okay, so here we are. This is the Oxford Times that's been reporting the Bullfinch trial, where a number of Asian men are accused of very, very serious sex offences on vulnerable children, some of whom were taken out of the so-called care system. But what's interesting in the Oxford Times articles, and one of their reporters has been attending court, is that defendants and witnesses are saying that the police were refusing to do their job, and this is one story saying that the police were refusing to do DNA tests on the clothes of children. I think in this case it was parents were saying that there's something wrong, we think these children are being abused, you need to do your job and do the tests, and the police simply refused. Very similar to police in Charles Cross Police Station in Plymouth, who became very angry, if not abusive, when 3 people tried to report the abuse of a 3-month-old baby in Wales. The police not only did not take a report of that crime, they shouted at 3 people to get out of the interview room. That's not hearsay, because I was one of the people in the interview room. So if we follow this through a bit more, what was going on was absolutely horrific. So one person, now woman, was a young girl at the time, told the jury she will never forget the man accused of the rape. This is a picture of the reporter from the Oxford Times who's been in there reporting. Now we're going to say well done to him, but we'd also like to say that the Oxford Times has been told about other abuses going on at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. In this case, the good Samaritan reporting the abuse was an Asian, and the victims were white children, the abusers were white, but for some reason the local authorities don't want to pick up on the story, they don't want to act, and the Oxford Times has so far failed to report. So highlighting some personalities, this is the Chief Executive of Oxfordshire County Council, Joanna Simmons, She's been attending court. It's been reported in the paper that she's been sitting in the Bullfinch court case with Jim Levers, the head of Children's Services, in order to watch proceedings. Could this be that they're fully informed on the fact, of course, that children that were taken out of the care system to be abused were actually in the so-called protective care of Joanna Simmons and Jim Levers? She's paid, of course, handsomely, so she's earning more than £200,000, but it would appear that this lady can't protect children in Oxford. And one of the things we're watching very carefully is that when we look at the Oxfordshire Child Safeguarding Board, we find an interesting little club of partnered organisations who are supposedly protecting children, have failed to do so, but now in particular the abuse in Oxford and Cherwell Valley College is coming to a head. They are simply covering each other's backs. And of course, if you look at the list here, you'll see that Thames Valley Police are part of this board, and so we're in this situation where these partnering organisations are working with the police, and instead of the police being to one side in order to be able to conduct fully independent investigations. It's a cartel. This is another report from the Oxford Mail from a girl who said she was so abused she never wanted to wake up. And we recently discovered that alongside Operation Bullfinch is another initiative from the police whereby the Kingfisher unit has been set up so that the part of the Bullfinch team are talking to local schools in order to protect children. So this is one Oxford school, and we are certainly not saying there's anything untoward going on at Cheney School in Oxford. What we are highlighting is that the police are working directly with local schools in Oxford, and that means the police are working directly with Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, but despite over 65 reports of abuse at the college and the testimony of a number of different witnesses and victims, Thames Valley Police are refusing to act. Many of the reports have gone through this police station, Cowley, and yet this is the very police station where this new initiative to protect children has been set up. There's something wrong here. This is the very brave Asian gentleman who tried to protect the white youths. The police have not only refused to take proper statements from him, but he's clearly been bullied, threatened and intimidated and lost his job for his efforts. Could it be that the aim of the Bullfinch operation is to pin paedophilia on the Asian community in order to whip up hatred between Asians and whites, Christians, however it works in the Oxford area? UK column has warned about Mr. Levers not telling the truth. He says everything to do with Oxford and Cherwell Valley College has been investigated. Clearly it hasn't. This is a bit more from the original police investigation set up. We'd just like to highlight that the head of Oxford and Cherwell Valley College and the head of Thames Valley Police are both common purpose and they know each other. Here's more of the Bullfinch case. Police easily persuaded to take no action. So young victims were complaining that when they went to the police, not only did the police not do anything, they actually felt intimidated. A report from the New English Review who talks about, I'll just highlight it, nothing happened after she went to the police. And at the bottom, she was threatened on a number of occasions with arrest for wasting police time. And this is exactly what has happened to victims of abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. If you want to know how bad it was, some of the girls, they were threatened that their houses would be burnt down or even that their heads would be cut off if they didn't perform the sex acts required. So at the moment we can clearly say that something very, very nasty is going on in Oxford, and whilst we have high publicity for the Operation Bullfinch, we are not seeing offences against white individuals being progressed, and we are certainly seeing reports from good people in the Asian community simply ignored. Is the agenda to create violence and unrest between the communities, is this being whipped up?
Okay.
Questions? I've just got a small note of course, if we look at the Holly Gregg abuse case, there's a Down syndrome girl who was abused in Scotland. Scottish authorities have spent over £500,000 covering that up. Eilish Angelini was a lady linked to the cover-up of those crimes, and we believe that she's now also in the Oxford area. Whether that's significant or not, we don't know at this stage. So, Kevin, are you still there?
I am, Brian.
You can start where you like. Tell us what you've been up to and what you've been looking at over the last few months.
Well, for the past 4 or 5 months now, we've launched a new project, which was to go over to the US, to New York, and move over with Free Thinking Voice, the Earth Needs Rebel show, myself and Andy Peacher. And we went out on Orion to get a both sides of the pond situation. As you know, you've come on yourself, Brian, and people have loved to hear you over there. So we're broadcasting over there now on Orion, and we're in a situation that we've got a reasonable number of listeners there, 1.2 million being a big station over there. And I can assure you, when you came on the show last time and spoke about common purpose, there were a few phone calls we got from people absolutely staggered that hadn't picked up on this in the first place. They were on the internet. There were people who had been around in the business for 20 or 30 years in radio, and they realised how serious this was in the UK, and it started people comparing the UK now in the US, and they're saying in the articles, this can happen to us. If we don't fight our stand now, we can finish up like the UK. So it's having an effect in protecting the US citizens, making them aware earlier, but it's also quite clear, Brian, that the UK is much more advanced in the problems of low empathy and the abusers and the corruption than the US is at present.
Well, it's really encouraging to hear you say that people are paying attention to the message. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? There's that famous quote that, how does it go? No man can be a prophet in his own land. That when you have an American who comes to Britain and is talking about the problems in America, there's an inherent substance to what they say. They're American, they must know what's going on. And I think maybe it works the other way. And I know there are many people speaking out, not only with you and Orion Radio, we've also got Radio Liberty as one example over on the west coast of America. And people do seem very interested when we start to talk about the nasty stuff that's happening in UK. Could it be that their image of Britain is sort of green fields, cups of tea, kind policemen and red buses, and we're rather shaking that image? Is that perhaps?
I think that's possibly part of the play here, because obviously we're all pretty reliant. Until the past year, you started the mainstream media side big time, and it was a great move, because until then, the voice wasn't getting out so well, it wasn't travelling so well, and you've done a lot of good work there. We're doing the same with different, mainly scientific writers, more senior people that we're bringing on to have a chat and express their views on what's going on. But the thing in the US is that there is this illusion of what the UK is like. But there's also now a fear, because they're picking up on the child situation, because the stories are getting out there that people are going on holiday in the UK and their children are being taken for forced adoption while they're holidaying, and they've only been there a few weeks. And of course, these cases are hitting the mainstream press a little bit as well. So now there's cautionary warnings going out when you go into the UK about your children being in danger, and also about health treatment. The US citizens are realising that health treatment is channeled financially to such an extent in the UK that we've got these death pathways, or care pathways as they dress them up. They know that it's coming to the US because we've got Obamacare, which we'll go into, and they can see the same things happening. It's coming from a different angle. The UK is coming from a state system that is sort of being privatised. You covered this much better than me. And the privatised section is going to be controlled by the state. So the state's going to have the say in all things, but like corporate's going to have the financial side. So we've got the far right, the far left, actually deciding together who's going to live, and who's going to die. And we've already got people at home being put on this Liverpool Care Pathway. This isn't a case of waiting until people get ill. It's selecting financially in many ways who you're going to promote, and I would say there's much more behind that. And as I'll just put one other point in, we've actually got a very senior doctor coming on next week. He's a CEO of a major Texas hospital, and he's coming on to educate US listeners on the dangers of Obamacare, that it's going to do exactly the same. It's going to be the state controlling and deciding what treatments people have. Even if they've got the money, we're looking in a situation that the state's going to regulate everything so that we're going to move towards the potential for something like Logan's Run, where we had people running to escape carousel, which was the death process, which was educated into the people as normal at age 30. We're heading towards 1984 this way, Brian.
Well, we certainly believe that, and thank you for sort of summarising like that. You just jolted my mind there. There are one or two people who at the moment are having a bit of a snipe at the UK column, and they're saying that we're being over the top on subjects. And so we decided that today we were really going to get into some of this stuff. So we've just been showing what's been happening in the NHS, and I hope you were able to see that. Very dangerous people. We've got hardline communists, which we're putting in charge of the most vulnerable people, people who are sick, people who are elderly, very young people, newborn babies. We're putting hardline communists in charge, and then we're backing them up with a lady whose history is of promoting death pathways. I mean, the evidence is clear for everybody to see if they know where to look for it. And it's laying the evidence out on the table, which seems to be the important thing.
I think the difficulty is, as the general public, we're quite moderate, most of us in the middle. We've got a good degree of empathy, so we don't see things that way. And the problem is that we've got the two extremes. We've got, like you're describing, the communist side and the fascist side of things, where both are very controlling regimes and concepts that result in basically the same personalities at each end, which are the poles of political systems, if you like. And the only way you can have a totally controlled society like 1984, you can't go one way or the other, because the other side will fight to take over. You've got to include both sides. And that's what's happened. We're trapped in the middle of all this as normal citizens with normal caring feelings, and we're sensible, we're moderate, and we don't want to believe what's before our eyes, and mainstream media certainly aren't publishing it as they should do. So we're left in a situation that until we come into contact with it, we go into hospital perhaps with a relative that we know is remarkably well and they've got the potential to life, and then we find that relative is put on the Liverpool Care Pathway. Little wonder we're picking up on stories of people taking their relatives out of hospital and actually being challenged on this, and those relatives living years later. Now, there's something awfully wrong that we've got a system that is writing off human life on a financial basis, shall we say, at the moment. But I think it's also an ideological base, in that they're trying to reduce the population to those that are more suitable, like 1984 thinking of more useful to the state, more useful to the corporate, and they don't want anyone that's going to cost money.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, that ideology, of course, apart from anything else, is straight out of the Nazi ideology. If you weren't useful to the state, you weren't playing your part to work within the state, to promote the state, then you were somebody that the state didn't want. And I think it's very interesting, this business. A lot of people, the famous expression is, why would they do that? The average person who at the moment is still in employment, they're still well fed, they're still having their foreign holidays. Life is, well, okay, there's a few problems, but in general they're fairly warm and cosy. And they're nice people. So they say, well, why would anybody want to do this? But of course, if we look through the history books, we see constantly in a repeating theme that very vicious people worm their way into power, and once they're there, they simply don't have the empathy or the love or the basic human affection which normal people have. They run to a totally different agenda. And somehow we've still got some work to do to say to people, well, actually, these people may have cut their hair, they may have suits on, they may have gone to the right universities, but we've now got people in power in Britain, and America I know is the same, who are not only very low empathy, I think we could suggest that some of them are going to the far end of the spectrum.
Absolutely. There's a full range out there, from low empathy disorders, which is a problem right at the start, I assure you. It's a slippery slope right the way through to psychopathy, as we know. We've got professors speaking out about this. We've got Professor Robert Hare, who is a criminal psychopathy psychologist from Canada. He spoke out in public, and it was printed in February last year, I believe, in that he believed that 10% of bankers were full-blown psychopaths. We've got the same work by Professor James Fallon in California State University, who's gone on to show the cross-generational effects of that. I spoke last time of that when I was on the 2nd of August to touch onto it. I won't go in depth again. But we've just had this week, we've had another professor speaking the same language. I know it's come out of this cross-generational factors by neurological brain scans, that this is apparent. Now, what we've actually got, the thing that is hard to grasp, we always think anything that's evil, anything that's going to cause us a problem, is going to be something out of a horror movie, and it's going to have horns and all these sort of things. But I'm afraid it's not like that. The charismatic psychopath or low empathy person is so ingenious with not having the feelings to tie them down. They smile as they kill, in John Lennon's language. The people on the hill smile as they kill. So you've got to understand that we're going to get conned every time as feeling honest people. When we're dealing with high-ranking officials, they are dressed up nicely in suits, they present themselves very well, often very articulate. But none of that is going to help us with those smiles know that they're quite coldly making decisions that are going to end people's lives, possibly our relatives' lives, and they're going to affect our children, and they're going to affect our future. Our whole life is going to be affected. And you have to understand, when you're within their collectives, we had a chance with James Kelly, who was the biotech advisor to George Bush in the White House. He's coming on again on Saturday. We're going in deep on the psychology side. Now, the thing about James, he got a great chance to see the inside of everyone Bush, everyone close up, when he was in there up until 2006. And he's explained to me on the last show how there was this coldness. You've got this collective effect in there, just like we've got in the UK, where people, if they express anything that isn't on the theme of where they're going within their collectives, immediately, and James explains, there's a shut-off in the eyes, like that we're not listening anymore, and then a switch back on afterwards with the same views, and a kind of obsessional belief of wherever they're going, dropping all protection and empathy for anything. And I think this is the kind of thing we're going to see if we get in anywhere, this kind of thinking, obsessive, sacrifice everything delusion for this goal, wherever they're going with this, and they're selling off all protection and empathy for everyone. And look at the failings in the hospitals. Look at Stafford, 1,200 deaths.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask Kevin, there seems to be, there's been so much publicity now about psychopaths. It's even hitting the mainstream over the last few weeks. They seem to be, I don't know, like a surge everywhere of psychopaths. Have they always been around but not so out there in the open, Kevin? Or is it is there something going on in the world that we've kind of got a rise of the psychopaths?
Well, to give you a base to this, I'll give you a professional base to this because he's already gone on air it. We're doing TV series with Professor Craig Weiner, who is a senior professor of psychology from Clark University in the US, Massachusetts. And we're covering originally ADHD, which contains low empathy in many cases, learning difficulty for not the psychopathic resentment basis, but it's just like a kind of innocent low empathy of not recognizing other people's perspectives. And that was covering how we handled people. But during those shows, what came out is that although the clinical side may diagnose 5% with ADHD, the belief is the non-clinical side could be as high as 25% of the world population. Right. Now, if that's so, that accounts for a varying degree of low empathy because of that disorder alone, which has not really got a full base of where it's coming from. Could be vaccination, could be anything. And if that's the case, add that to normal situation of low empathy transference, like we're hearing from California State University, the cross-generational stuff that's been proved in the big families and the aristocracy and everything coming across that way, then look at putting it all together as collectives where people start to work together. And I've given you this before, Brian. Put 10 people with low empathy in a room, well, 8 with low empathy, 2 normal. The 2 that are normal will either become like that to survive or they'll leave. So you can understand how each unit we've got in the States, each corporate unit, is becoming more and more low empathy because it's very distasteful to us to work with people who are making decisions that don't protect others. And if we don't want to finish up like that, we've got to leave. John Perigine, I'll touch on John Perigine. He explains all this, CPS worker from the US, of why he left, I think it was back in 2005, after 13 years in the CPS as a social worker, because he didn't want to finish up hardened. He realised it wasn't working. They were taking children for financial reasons and shifting them from poor families to wealthy families so that the state did not bear the price of the support of the families. It was a complete predatory attack like we've got in the UK. So all of this low empathy is becoming forward. I know where you're going, Lou.
Yeah.
Why have we got it so visible?
Yeah,
well,
but there's
can you
also,
imagine?
it seems nowadays, Kevin, that people in general don't have enough empathy and caring for one another. In the whole world in general,
everybody's a bit tense.
Everybody's
aggressive.
tense, and it's all about them, and it's about me, and it's all about them. There's no caring for other people. Like just even like your neighbours, people don't pop in and care for your neighbours, and there's no community spirit anymore. It's all about the single person, and it just seems to be increasing more and more, I think.
It's that's actually disassociation in a technical term. That is happening more and more, and it's happening because if we get burnt, if we carry our feelings on a sleeve like we did in probably the 70s, I'm old enough to remember all that, then today if we do that, we're more likely, because of the number of others with low empathy and contact with the states, contact with officials, and we're upfront, honest emotionally, we're going to get taken advantage of. So society, without thinking about it, is learning to self-protect by not having their feelings on the sleeve. And they may appear they're low empathy. They're not always. They may be taking protective measures. One of the protective measures we have is Sigmund Freud's natural defense mechanism. One of them is intellectualization. So as intellectuals, from that point of view, we can talk over the top of our emotions, not have them on a sleeve so we can detach a little bit in our communications. That's one method. But if you go across the general population when those abilities aren't quite as heavy, then people are literally cutting off. They're isolating more. They'll go with their own little collective, shall we say, where they feel safe. But you've got a situation that people are not socialising quite as much as they were in the open way 30, 40 years ago. And I think this is very sad as well, because that was where we got the knowledge of what was really going off when we went down the local pub or we went down the local cafe and we socialised together. We all sat down and we passed the information between ourselves. A lot of that's been lost and been replaced by social networking, shall we say, that isn't that favourable for this.
Right. Thank you for that, Kevin.
Well, if I might just come in here, Kevin. I've said this before at talks that I've done, but I think it's becoming more and more relevant. My father's 93 years old, and he said to me a few years back, Brian, do you think people have changed? And what he then went on to was the fact that when he remembered back into his working life, he said, you might have people who were actually quite poor, but when they went to work, they were whistling and humming and singing and chatting and laughing to colleagues. And he said people are different. Have they changed? And I said to him, well, it's not a question that they've changed, it's they have been changed. And I think the thing which nice people have got to start thinking about now is that the bad people, doesn't mean to say that they're bad people are thick. On the contrary, a lot of very bad people are highly intelligent, and they spend their time analysing society and people to see how they can get one over on us and what they can do. And if I just come back to this little table again, I'm pushing this book, but there's some incredible things. So this is what this Soviet defector, I've got his name here, Thomas Schumann was the original person. So the plan says it was a national destabilization plan of the KGB GRU based on Soviet defector intelligence. I'm just going to read some of the phrases and some of the things it's talking about. It says, so we're going back here, we're looking early 80s when this particular plan came to light. But it said that religion was going to be politicised, it was going to be made commercial, happy-clappy, there was going to be an ignorance of scripture, empty ritual. It predicted that women would become priests, and they were going to implement racism inside the church. Education was going to become permissive and just deal in relativities rather than facts and skills. Media, there was to be a monopolisation of news and comment, manipulation of information and thought, constant criticism and discrediting of the institutions. I'll just give you a couple more. Law and order was to become legislated, imposed, inconsistent, with an unwarranted bias in favour of the offender, and victims are to be victimised. That's pretty vicious. If we have a look at families, marriage is to be destroyed, and personally I think this is what the whole drive for gay marriage is about. I think that at the moment the gays in this country and America are being used, but they simply don't realise what's being done to them. But so for family and society, foster, break down, destroy marriage, and especially for Louise here, because the next one is health. It says that basically there's going to be a promotion of junk food, drugs, state-provided conditional health care, mass sports, mixing of races, elevation of racism to a Hitlerian level, promotion of diversity, degradation of breeding, and then the debate, and I think this is brilliant, is going to be genetics versus environment.
Wow.
So this book is so fantastic because the man who's done the analysis on it is unbelievably detailed, and he said watch out, because what is really coming with the European Union is a rebuild. It's not communism, it's not fascism, it's a blend called communitarianism.
The book is called The European Union Collective.
I must have a look at that one, but that is exactly what we've got, isn't it? You only need to look at it when you were going through that, Brian. We can look into the different areas of society. We can look into the legal system, even the media itself. We can see people's behaviour. What we've got that underpins all of that, it's an attempt to confuse society, a very successful attempt, by the way. And how it works is this. Whilst people are very empathic and very open-minded, and they're not being particularly stressed, they can see the wood for the trees, and they're not getting terribly confused about things, so it's very apparent. But if you then start to stress people, and they can't quite see where these stresses are coming from, and they're being fed information that's misleading through the media, and the programming starts all the way through, you start to develop a situation where people are feeling very stressed. They start to lower their empathy. It's part of stress. And then when they do that, they start to project and transfer what they feel, the pain they feel, into anything they can associate it with if they're confused. So if someone's being controlled and pressured in these situations by things we see in the media, this is why you see the Facebook wars. It's why you see the battles on the comment sections of papers between people. And they're attacking the actual people often that are trying to help and overcome things, because they're projecting on anyone that shows actual empathy. I think I spoke to you before on this, Brian, that people with low empathy, and particularly psychopathy, absolutely hate and detest and are sickened by caring. So they're attracted automatically like a magnet to attack anyone that presents that way, which is why a lot of organisations that get attacked helping people, where people trying to protect children from paedophiles get attacked. So all of that behaviour, if you imagine, is a stress ball that we see spinning around. And this is distracting everyone from where the stresses are coming from. because they're thinking it's each other. It's not each other at all. It's coming down from the top in this kind of control structure that you're describing, so that we're all mixed up and we can't organise and overcome it.
I've got a document here which we had up earlier, which you should have been able to see, which is to do with Luton, if Mike's able to bring it up on screen for us again. And one of the things that I've certainly been very interested in for a long time is the language being used in documents. So you have been mentioning people coming into organisations and basically changing. So good people, perhaps they're already in the organisation and then the management changes, or good people come into an organisation and then they are changed by the organisation itself. But there's something going on with the whole of the management culture and the language that they're using. And this Luton document is using this very ethereal transformation language where it seems to be promising a lot of things, but there's no substance to a lot of it. I'm throwing this at you, Kevin. Would you like to?
No, I picked up on it when you put it up earlier. The key word is transformation, obviously, in this.
Yeah.
What's behind that? First of all, it's going to have effect of suspicion is one end of the scale on this. And then the other side of the scale, depending on how a person's functioning, they might perceive it as change for the better before they even look behind the cover, or change for the worse. But what we've actually got still running today, I'll go back to the original Thatcher years. After Thatcher came in the beginning of 79, she made a couple of announcements which she knew what she was doing. And the workplace situation where the power in the workforce was through the unions having an influence, basically, she made sure that she got the message out that by choosing the right kind of people and placing them from day one, they were looking for selfish people, people motivated on that side to replace people that were ethical, more moralistic. That was the concept on one side with Thatcher. And I remember a few years later on an interview, she announced on an outdoor interview, I couldn't pinpoint it, she just announced, greed is okay. And this was the kind of view. Now, that's the mentality of low empathy, selfish people. So you can imagine when we're looking at that kind of document, Brian, a transformation, we're talking of a further transformation into lower empathy, another regrouping, another wave of people. Now, if you want to look back in history at this actually happening, go back to Adolf Hitler and how he picked his SS people and his leadership. You'll be able to read there how he always placed two people competitive on each role, played them against each other, and it was constantly being rolled over. And if you look at the brown shirts, when he put out the SS to knock them out, basically because they'd done their business, it was moving up to the SS, the same techniques are used in transformation. Basically, the new wave eats the old wave in many cases as you move on to a more and more predatory system. And we're talking of a control system, Brian. The answer in low empathy is control. It's never facing you've got it wrong, never facing that. So all you get is increased control that we're seeing, more judgmental, until eventually you start sterilizing people because you consider them not suitable, they're defective, and eventually you finish up with genocide. I think we've already got genocide. I'm certainly looking at the number of deaths, Brian, in the DWP situation with ATOS involved in that. We've got reported now, I'll just pull part of the figures on this, there were 8,000 of the deaths in 2011, 8,000 over 9 months of that. There were 10,700 altogether, were within 6 weeks of those people being judged fit for work.
Might mention that, and this is what you'd actually sent over to me.
That's right.
And what we say to people, of course, is consider this against the 1,200 deaths at Staff's Hospital. This is another path where people are just being pushed over the edge. We're not going to be talking in any detail about the suicides today, but that is another wave which is coming through the country.
I'm just going to say
Okay.
thank you to TNS, because we're going to be signing off from TNS in a minute, and I think we're going to carry on streaming live on the UK Column website for a bit longer with Kevin. I'm going to say goodbye because I have a school run to do.
Okay, and this
So
is the
Kevin's
beauty
gonna
about
carry
UK Column
I
Live,
know,
because you
it's
can
just raw.
depart out the... It can't happen on the BBC, but we're normal people. So Louise is going to walk out of the huge studio. That'll be
Yeah.
10 feet,
Oh,
5
absolutely.
feet. Okay.
Okay, thanks to TNS and thanks to all the UK Column viewers. Won't see you next week. It will be back on the following week.
Okay, drive
Okay,
safely.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're just keen that we do at least get this recorded, Kevin, because we know you've got some very important information, but unfortunately we can't extend the slot with TNS, so a little bit of manoeuvring here.
No problem.
Okay, are you happy if we carry on, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So what we're seeing is basically we have a culture which is being driven through the public sector. UK Column has printed a great deal of information about this very secretive leadership committee, which is being run by Francis Maud, and of course Eric Pickles is in there. We have shown documents, and we're happy to show those again, clearly identifying that both Labour, Lib Dems and the Tories are using Saul Alinsky policy. We've got a government that's already spent tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, on applied behavioural psychology to change people's behaviour. It's got to be real. The BBC has reported it, but also it's got to work, because the government was boasting a few weeks ago that they're actually selling this behavioural psychology, these techniques, is being sold to, amongst other countries, the Australians. So what I think we're seeing at the moment is that we've got the viciousness of the control structures that we'd see in a Stalinist or a Nazi type society. Those are coming into play, but now we've got the additions of the fact that we can actually via the internet, via training programs, via lean change agents, we can actually start to push through the psychology. Have you been able to identify how people are being affected by this type of applied psychology, Kevin?
Absolutely. It's as it was originally intended. Saul Alinsky, it was to destroy society from within, really. What we're looking at is basically just how we function. We can't help it. We do function this way. And if you start to get people to do things that they're not comfortable with, then they've got to survive with that. They've either got to sit in their guilt and responsibility and suffer the pain and then do it again, make decisions in hospitals or wherever they are that are going to cause people to be injured, lose their lives, and their empathy is falling all the time in response to what they're doing. This rolls on. The same effect is on people if they can't cope with it in a way. They're having the same problem. There's an empathy roll-off. When you look at it all together, and it's all rolling together in groups of people doing this, we get the odd chance of people coming on that kindly speak out from within, like John Perugine, why they got out, and also telling us that the people who stayed in, they can't associate with them anymore because their empathy's gone so far that when they do communicate again, they're almost being drawn into the mindset, is the word used, mindset of the same thinking. So if they're being drawn into the mindset of the same thinking when they've got out and recognise it so easily, can you understand the collective psychological effect of how we work in groups, and that can be very powerful. Even when we've left it and we try to communicate it, we get drawn back in. So can you imagine what it's like in government? Can you imagine over the NHS and all these organisations? Why? I watched a bit where Patrick was approached by someone in the BBC side that you televised the other day. And he turned around and he was told, basically, that the BBC were correct, whatever his words, better on this, from a very arrogant viewpoint, and offended where Patrick was going and telling Patrick he'd never worked for the BBC, whatever. The point is, that arrogance, they actually believe it, Brian. That's the dangerous thing. They do believe it. You are right in many areas when you've said this. They're actually buying into their own rhetoric.
Well, one of the things that we pick up on, I'm here on my own, for viewers who haven't noticed, is the fact that if you make a call now to a local authority, invariably, not always, but invariably, the person who asks the phone, if you don't ask something that's totally easy, if you start to need some help in who you're going to talk to, or perhaps you're trying to get hold of somebody in the organisation that the average member of the public wouldn't want to get hold of, so you're just pushing the envelopes a bit with the person who answers the phone, it's amazing at how quickly they can become very cold and abrupt. And,
yes.
and if you stand your ground, then they can become quite hostile. And a common trick that then comes back is they accuse you of being angry or shouting at them when you haven't actually raised your voice. So it seems even by challenging the little script that they've got in front of them, they can start to project a sort of hostility back. And
Yes.
what we feel on this is, of course, if that is a mindset which is now somebody, with due respect to the people, they're doing an important job, but we could say they're at the front end, they're at the bottom front end of the organisation. If that's what they are now like, what are the people at the top like?
Yeah, I think we got that from John Perigin anyway, because of decision makers being away from the front line with social workers. That's one example of this. Behind the front line, you've got another line and another line. And they know when they're on the front line doing the job, even if with the best will in the world, that if they start to breach anything that they're guided to do, if they start to flex in any way and anything goes wrong, it's going to be the line behind them and the line behind them that's going to eat them. This is the structure. So you've got that for starters, and that pressure. And you've also got the fact that these people, like I've described, like you've described, when they're being approached for help, if someone's being attacked, if a child's been attacked, if they're not responding like they did 30 years ago in protecting, they're following a different agenda that can, in many instances, result in a predatory attack to actually suppress the person. Now, that comes from partially the knowledge within the units of what might happen to them if they don't go this way. Sometimes there is a little bit of a message going down the line, or enough influence to let them know which direction to go. I'll give an example of that in a minute. But there's also under the surface that these people are actually projecting where it's safe to project. They can't project upwards. So you're a lowly citizen in there. They're fairly safe to project downwards in the society we've got today, where we've got systems that are generally predatory, and it's clear to see. So they know if they blame the patient, shall we say, if it's a hospital, if it's the police, they blame the complainant. It's fairly safe to do so because they're going to be backed. And beyond this, of course, this can trigger, with complainants, attacks on the children of the family by social services sent out by the state as well. So that picture's fairly well there. I'm just going to pull one bit of information from the John Perigin interviews. I asked John, how did he know when they moved children from birth families to foster families and then on to adoptive families? They knew, it was an unsaid thing, he says, they knew not to raise attention to children being harmed and abused when they were in state care, or when they were in probably a state unit where it might be a care unit with the original parents they brought in there, not to press the buttons there. He explains that within the interviews. And he doesn't go on to ever explain anything other than that. And I believe he's possibly right that if you see something happen to a colleague, whether you're in the police force or you're in the NHS or you're in the newspapers or you're in social services, you're going to take note of that on the job, and you're going to think that could happen to me. So you don't actually need to be told. You get a sense of what you can and can't do. And that has gradually slid us over, instead of protecting society, to being predatory on society, because society doesn't have much value to the state or corporate at all.
Right. Now, if I just sort of add a bit of background to what you're talking about. So in broad terms, we're talking about culture change within organisations. Okay, it's a change in management style and maybe wider, so we'll call it the culture in the organisation. In the early days, when we were beginning to get interested in what this wonderful political charity Common Purpose was doing, an individual came out of the woodwork in Plymouth of reasonably mature years, and they provided some extremely interesting information about leadership courses being conducted in the very, very early 70s, with roots going back into the 60s, but this person was talking with first-hand experience. He'd been part of what was going on in the 70s, where they had started to run leadership courses within the trade union movement. And he explained that the basic agenda was to try and improve what he described as blue-collar, white-collar relations. So trying to get management to work better with people on the shop floor would be the correct term. But the word leadership had already come in. And the person said to me that they were interested in speaking to me because they'd seen some of the material that I was talking about to do with Common Purpose. And they said, well, when they thought back, it was obvious that what they had been in the middle of was a very early version of what was then coming through the system with Common Purpose. And then if we move forward to the mid-80s, Julia Middleton, Chief Executive of Common Purpose, is saying that suddenly she's got £500,000 and starts this charity. Well, of course, she was in America before that, and you don't just get given 500,000 people by innocent donors. The money came from banks. Then the Common Purpose agenda starts, where you can see that they recruited key individuals primarily within the public sector, so within local authorities, police, fire service, universities, education, etc. And it's my belief, I'll say it that way because I want to ask you a question, it's my belief that these people were actually the lean change agents. They were designed to get in to start to get the ideology embedded into organisations and in order to recruit people who could then help that ideology to spread. I've put that forward as my belief. What would your comment be on that?
I think the base is there. There's a little bit more to it. We tend to think and analyse things from what's said, mainly, rather than the feelings underneath it and everything we have. And what proves that is, obviously, you've gone a long way to try and get people to realise the effects of NLP, is that proves that what is said is only a small part of the message, Brian. And that applies in exactly where you're going as well. So when you're training people to be leaders of the future, it's not just the language, it's all the feelings underneath it and everything else. And what you're doing, you're training people, in the case of Common Purpose, this is what's happening. You're training people with an ideology under the surface. And to do that, you've got to get the people to have a goal. There's got to be an end of the rainbow somewhere. And it's in that statement, leaders of the future, really. It's rather like Hitler and the brown shirts, the first wave. So you train these people in the belief, like a kind of oppositional belief, that they sacrifice empathic protection and all kinds of other things around themselves, because they have to do that to be leaders of the future, the way Common Purpose say. Because the concept behind this, as I explained, we never went in depth in it, but when people are functioning in the early role of this, if we go back to, shall we take 2728 when we were talking, what was actually happening, you'd be placing people quite lowly, probably administration leaders of the future in the NHS, and then their concept is that because of this obsessional kind of belief in this, that this is the way to go, this is what's inside their minds, then it's okay to breach the guidelines to be effective leaders of the future under certain circumstances. Now, this is going across all the professions the same. We're seeing it in legal cases where we look at it as corruption, where we see people behaving outside their guidelines, outside their ethics of even their own bodies in certain cases where we see normal behaviour in others. So we're seeing a potential within society to throw the switch with the leaders of the future common purpose that has built up under this. It's got much more complicated today, as you know, Brian, because we're moving up levels. The first wave has done its job. They've got this into place, and it's not just the ideology. They've changed the very feelings of the collectives that are in towards a lower empathy just by coexisting. We know that because of having people on the shows like you've had them on that have pulled out. They've been in local authority work. They've spoke out what it's like when they've gone out, and they're getting out because basically they'll finish up the same. If you carry on doing this as a leader to the future, giving up all the protective factors, your empathy has to fall. Your arrogance is going to increase in your projection of the general population and your disassociation. So it's a kind of working towards psychopathy, low empathy that projects on the rest of society that we see in the extremes of fascism. And also in the communists, it's just the same. It's just a two-tier party system where you've got an arrogant upper tier. It's just the same. It was the same in East Berlin with the Stasi. So we've got the same system being created with Saul Alinsky under the surface of all this that's been going for some time. It's been very carefully engineered. The only thing I would say that advantages us is as their empathy falls, so does their creative ability to adapt. Ours doesn't, because we keep our empathy. That's where it comes from. Our creativity is there. We're adapting with the media and what we're doing in the alternative media all the time. You're adapting constantly in what you're doing. That's our advantage, Brian.
Well, this is a very good thing, because we're for many people this is a very heavy subject, and we're constantly being asked to give the good news, and that is a big ball of light in the middle of this dark stuff here, because these people aren't creative. And one of the attributes that we're getting from people who contact us who've got problems with the establishment is very often they're talking about material being stolen from them. They had an idea, maybe it was a business idea, maybe it was intellectual intellectual material on some other initiative. We had a very brave lady, Seven, in the studio the other day talking about media intellectual property being stolen. So these people have to steal the ideas and creative nature of people because they can't do it themselves. Ironically, or not, they then label their own activities very often as being creative when they're far from creative, they're destructive. Is this something I'm just sensing, or is there some sense in it?
You're absolutely spot on, Brian. We see it. It was part of corporate. If you're part of a corporate organisation, you know you're not supposed to shine. You're definitely not supposed to shine. It's an arrogant structure. It is this structure where you've got the low empathy at the top in big business. So if you're a creative person low down, the unfortunate thing in that kind of structure is that you might have great ideas. You might get away with announcing your ideas as long as someone senior to you takes the reward for all of this. But what we actually see is the charismatic side of that structure in making sure that anyone that's doing anything good, no matter who's thought through it, is one of their faces, one of the faces of this charismatic structure that they're presenting from, and never more so than we're seeing in the way you're presenting the state officials and government officials moving around from one speciality to another. Obviously, they can't have the knowledge across both, yet they seem to shine in every one, Brian.
Well, they shine, or if they don't shine, they get promoted anyway. So it's a pretty generous system in lots of ways. I've just been calling a couple of things up on screen while I've been talking to you. We're talking about the way people. We've got individuals that are low empathy. They are creating a structure around us. They're interfering with our normal lives, our family lives. There's a weight creeping into the country, turbulence. They seem to be going into all sorts of areas in order to affect the way an ordinary person would think, and to essentially stop us being happy and cheerful and having a good time with our families and our children. And I won't overdo this, but these are some photographs that were sent to me fairly recently. Some viewers might be absolutely stunned at this. We've got a lady in a play. This took place in Rudry Village Hall in South Wales. And if you can't quite make it out, she's got the severed head of a dog on her head. Behind her, we've got a cow's skull and decorated horns.
I thought you'd taken me into a Freemason event at the first point of this. But
Well, we certainly haven't. This is an example of the types of play that are now cropping up in many community halls and community groups across the country, but I'm going to focus here on South Wales. And what's interesting is that the theatre groups always label themselves creative dance and drama, creative theatre, creative this. And yet when we're actually looking at what these plays look like, they are unbelievably dark and macabre. Many of them are talking about sexual assault. Very often they're talking about suicide. I'll just show you another shot from this particular play. I get an uneasy feeling when I look at the man dressed as the baby with a baby in a pushchair. But if you look over his shoulder to his left, you can also see that the man with his white underpants has got a rather unpleasant mark, as has the woman. So
but not only macabre, it's also suggestive, isn't it?
it's very suggestive, yeah. And yet these plays are actually being funded by, amongst others, the National Lottery. So if you look at the National Theatre of Wales, so this is part of the government structure, they're actually promoting the plays and they're promoting they're pushing the money forward in order to allow these plays to take place. I'll just give you one more shot from this play. We're going to do more on this. But we also know that in many cases very, very sophisticated lighting techniques are used with the play as well. So we are seeing this material not just put in front of adults, but we're starting to see it being given to increasingly young children. And of course, I've already highlighted in other talks about what's happening in South Wales, that we've had companies like the First Light Film Company teaching children as young as 11 how to make horror movies and films about suicide. But my key point here is that this is actually being fully promoted and pushed home by the government's own so-called creative culture agenda. Any comments at all?
Well, your first effect of that is obviously desensitisation we're looking at. I don't know what age group we've got in these that are actually watching this, but the younger they are, the more influenced they're going to be, Brian. And you've got something that is so different from everything else we're looking at mainstream there. You're being taken into a separate area of this, being put on live in the play situations of placing before people things that would normally not associate quite in the way they are as well. And there is some associations, particularly with the guy with the baby, is really suggesting paedophilia to me in many ways under the surface of that, the associations. The macabre elements of it, the blood elements of it, and the severed heads element of it, again, are all figures that we don't normally associate with anything safe or anything like a baby or something like that. And they're put together so that people are looking at this, if they're watching and taking in this information, they're going to, and especially if it's happening over a period of time and more events of this, they're going to accept it to be normal to associate these things at that point in their development. So they're being presented by figures that they perhaps look up to. They're going to put it together. It's what happens after that is the problem, you see. If we see things like this, where we are shown things okay to be together. Now, if we're dealing with kids and we then look at situations where perhaps someone makes an improper approach to them around anything that's over this side, they're not going to have quite the same defensive reaction as they would have before they're fed material that puts information into their minds of associations that would set alarm bells ringing in the first place. They're going to sort of accept it. And it's rather like, if you look at horror movies, how we constantly confronted with the game systems and situations where there's death and destruction and that it's got to the stage that the military put someone behind a screen and they can do anything they like. It's not face-to-face. You can do what you like that way because your childhood conditioning is all that way as well, this acceptability. Now, if we turn the clock back to 1970 or the 1960s and look at this not being done, then can you understand when you get to an adult and you're presented with that information, or as an older child, the alarm bells are going to ring. They did ring, and we knew things were wrong, and that's how we were brought up. I think a lot of this is to condition people to accept extremely bizarre things as if normal, and therefore to lower their self-protecting capabilities of recognition.
Right, okay, well, thank you very much for that analysis. We've got 5 minutes to go, Kevin, and I think what would be really good to do is if we can use the last 5 minutes on what's the good news and what can we do to break ourselves out of this. I'm just going to jump back to a slide, well, actually, it's of your website, if I can just do the business while I'm talking. But there have been some attempts to shut Orion Radio up. I'm just going to bring up this picture. I cheated a bit, so in the middle I've got a posting that is on the website, but at the moment it isn't at the top of the home page, but I moved it up to the top, where it's saying Orion attacks continue with regional something. Tell us what's actually been happening to Orion, and what are you guys doing about it?
We're talking of denial of service. All the hosts are speaking out heavily on Orion. You know, the majority of the guys have had 20 to 40 years in the business. Jimmy, who runs Orion at 40 years, is mainstream as he is today, as well as Orion going out. And, of course, the other side of Orion, it's constantly climbing the figures. We're 1.2 million listeners per month now and rising. So it's a reasonable voice. It's not like mainstream. But once you get to these kind of figures and you start to attract guests, certainly like our show is, we've got 7 guests a week, 365 guests a year coming onto the show in a production line, senior people, professors, doctors, consultants, scientists, in physics, in biochemistry, all speaking out, the very polite people that you don't expect to speak out, speaking out in very polite ways in their own methods of what is wrong, by some of them just by pointing the way in a different direction. Now, because this is all happening, the general public are then able to see, like you're doing, Brian, that, hang on a minute, why aren't we getting this through mainstream media? What's going on? This must be real, because these people are senior. Why would they say these things? Why would they write books around these things? And yet our mainstream media and our politicians are telling us something entirely different. So basically, it's breaking the illusion. It's breaking the delusion that they're putting into the general public, and this is important. Why we're having problems with attacks? We used to have them personally. If we put a show on, I'll quote one because you'll get it on the air of the show, it actually happened. When we tried to go with John Perigine, it was a prime example. To record the part 3 took 3 attempts because we were knocked off air all 3 times. We were under a cyber attack. And what was obvious in this one, you'll hear it on the show, they shut down John's electric on his house twice during the show. Now, you can't go further than that to do that. Now, that's all stopped. We've not got that kind of cyber attack anymore. Our shows go out. If anything, it's normal technology problems. We know that. So now they're interfering with the feeds, Brian. And it started a while ago, or before last year, where the Orion feed was taken over from the Philippines, I believe it was, with a music feed over the top of it, wiping out Orion, going out 24 hours a day. Of course, Orion's everywhere. It's in every feed. It's tuning radio, the lot. So the idea now is to wipe out and interfere with the archives IT-wise. We've got some bright guys on IT in Orion in the States that are fighting back. But what this is about, this particular article, it's moved on to a regional multi-attack level now. So we're really battling to stay on air at times because of the level of attack to
Right,
try
but
and stop us getting the voice out.
If we stay on the positive angle, we can say that the message is definitely working, which is why the attacks are coming in. And what will be brilliant is obviously for more people, whether you can blog or Twitter or tweet what you believe to be the truth. The more people who are doing that, the more difficult it is, of course, for the other side to counter it. And we've got two beautiful lessons, if we just jump back to the Cold War days, is good people in Russia and Germany, the Eastern Bloc, they, of course, knew the governments were corrupt and they knew about propaganda. So they were running their own little messenger system of passing the information under the surface. And I think we could learn a lot from those people. And perhaps the other thing is that dear old Saul Alinsky himself said if you want to achieve change, which we certainly do, then you've got to make the issue personal. It's no good complaining about Westminster and the government and the Tory party. We've got to say who is the man responsible, Mr. Gove, Mr. Osborne, David Cameron, Clegg. The problem is coming from people, it's not coming from organisations. So we've got a minute to go. Any last words that you'd like to...
You're coming on again, thank goodness, to talk to our US audience again on the 28th, I think it is, Brian. And they're starting to tune into you now because you know, obviously getting you on more regular is great. And they're picking up on what's happening in the US from your side. We're linking them back to UK column, as you know, that you're on the site LinkedIn now. But something you say on the shows is very important. I point that out. And it is to get people to be aware on one side that not everyone is bad. And that's absolutely true. The proof of that is the guests coming on. Most senior people you wouldn't expect to speak the way they are coming on and speaking out. But the other thing is you ask people to talk to each other. You ask people to inform each other, to get it going vocally. And we really need that, Brian. We've lost a lot of the pubs and the places we would go to do that. Don't be afraid to talk to each other. Yes, one lady recently said to me, when she became aware, she was very senior, she's got senior roles all her life, never realised. And she wrote to me, she says, you know, it was like waking up on the dark side of the moon.
Okay. All right. Well, that's excellent. We've ended on a chuckle. Kevin, as always, thank you very much for coming on and bringing that wealth of knowledge, not only about what you're dealing with, but this great news that we've now got professional people who've suddenly realised they're on the wrong side and they're stepping across. And that's what we need to drive. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in with UK Column Live and staying with us. Tomorrow's show will be at 12 o'clock. I'm just watching Mike carefully, make sure I've got my timings right. And remember that we will be off air next week. This is not the result of the state. It's simply we need to get the UK column out. So we hope you'll join us the week after next. Thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.